picked up lately. And so that's a bit of a problem if you can only see in the last few part, but you cannot see the early kinetics. So it looks like something happened suddenly. And then if there's a change in the reproductive number, it's not so clear that there has been a change. But if you put in a log scale, you can immediately see that there's been a change. And you can also see that things did not suddenly happen. There was not sudden growth, but actually it's been going continuously since day 0. So that's why the log scale is so useful. So this is, these are all old graphs from Canada, because of course data is not so well updated anymore. So I wanted to show you kind of old data. So this is the actual number of new cases. Each red dot is the number of new cases for that day. And you cannot see the black dots, they're right at the bottom. It's the number of deaths for each day. Now, if you put that on the log scale, suddenly there's a lot of features that become visible. You can see that indeed, like I was saying, you can see kind of a series of straight line. Already your eyes can start to see it. And this is when the reproductive number change. The other thing that's nice is now you can see the death on the same graph. And the other thing you notice is that the curve in the red is exactly an echo of the curve in the black. In other words, we can use cases to predict how many people will die in the future very accurately. And so if you want to know how busy your hospital is, you can see that this is going to be a very good indicator. So what we do to do the analysis is we first apply a smoothing. So a lot of people do this moving average, and the moving average is very stupid for 2 reasons. You should at least do the average in log space. And the other reason is that you're averaging over the last 7 days, for example, and then putting it today. Well, that's actually, the data should be recentered, right? And so you're always a little bit behind. So what we do is we use a Gaussian kernel where we're actually, you don't have these rough edges. You actually have this smooth continuous averaging, and we do it, of course, in log space. And then you could go and do piecewise linear estimation. So this is by a fantastic paper by Maggio, which you can look up. And basically, Kip's contribution to this work, you saw his face on the first page. Basically, Kip, my partner, his job was coding up this linear regression adaptive, because it's kind of a difficult problem because you have to keep moving the inflection point and then redoing the fitting all the time. So there's a lot of moving parts. So Maggio figured out how to do this, and then Kip coded it up. So that's how we're actually running. Those blue lines is Kip's contribution to this. What you can see is early in the pandemic, the case to death ratio is around 10%. It dropped to 2% in the second wave in Canada, second wave. And then once vaccine were introduced, that number was more like 0.5%. More recently, we'll see what that looks like. We're looking at the past now, and we'll look at, so let's look at the past first. So this is Japan as it was during the thick of it. We can remember those types of images. And so this is all out to April 22. So this is the death per case, but this is now in Japan as opposed to Canada. And what you can see is that the first wave was less deadly in Japan. 2% was also true in Japan, and in fact, it was true worldwide, the 2% case to death. And you could also see the effect of the vaccine at 0.5%. So it's very consistent throughout the world, is kind of 0.5% post-vaccine introduction. You can also try to look at how this breakpoints in these linear regression might be affected by new strains arriving. So this is the arrival of alpha. So at the bottom is this strains being analyzed for Japan. This is Japan's analysis of the circulating strains. And this is the arrival of the alpha. You can see it actually seems to correspond with a drop, but you could also see these green lines are when the government changed measure. So if there was a lockdown or something, or restrictions became strict again, those are the solid green line. So most likely the change in slope was actually due to the government intervention and people's compliance, and not so much to the arrival of alpha. But still, it's after alpha, if you look back, it's after alpha that we see this 2% kind of come in. So perhaps what it did is it changed the death to case ratio at that point. You can see my break point here is when I switch from 6% to 2% death. This is the break point here. So maybe before alpha that was true. Then you can see here the arrival of this new strain in gray seems to make a break in the slope. And then over here, this is the arrival of Delta. And then over here, you could see the arrival of Omicron last winter. So that was, last winter. So that was unpleasant. And you could see it now go up. So this was then. And so the case remained high in Japan since Omicron's arrival. So basically up to when they stopped taking data, the cases remained high. So the death rate came from 2% to 0.13% after the arrival of Omicron plus the vaccine. And then in March, masking became optional. And then in May, they decided to pretend COVID was like flu. And it was the end of high quality data and our ability to track where the pandemic is going particularly accurately. Is there any questions at this point? All right. So where are we now? Well, there's been a bit of over-tourism. I hope you appreciate these nice photos of completely overcrowded Japan. And so what's happened? So there is some reporting in these weird numbers of number of doctors visit. And what you can see is this is when they decided that COVID was like the flu, right there in May. And this is what happened thereafter. So you could see that that was maybe not so true. And then the other thing we get is we get these kind of cryptic graphs where we can see, well, the arrows are up everywhere, if you didn't know, or most places, and the cases keep going up. So that was, I think, as of, this is as of September 3rd, which the situation, I think, has changed a little bit since then. In terms of getting data, as I said, the public data stopped being reported on the 8th. And what happened after that is kind of a curious thing. So over here in orange is actually data provided by the Moderna website. And thank you to Tada-san for pointing the existence of this site. This is data that has been guessed by the pharmaceutical company Moderna based on the JAMDAS data. So JAMDAS data is this data you're looking here. So this number of patient visits, this 20.5 people, they figured out over the time of the pandemic how to correct it to make it look like the real case counts. And so they have some algorithm that is secret and known only to them, where they're basically predicting-ish the data. Because it looks good behind, I'm kind of feeling somewhat confident, so I've been using this. And so using their data, I continued to track. So this is May 8th when the public data stopped, and then in orange is the actual Moderna maintained data. So that's how I've been able to keep track. And with that, I'm able to then predict the number of deaths. And so you maybe don't know this, but currently there are around 200 people that are dying of COVID in Japan every day. So today, 200 people will die of COVID. And this has happened since at least mid-August. This has been true. As a comparison, every day across Japan, that's how many people are dying of COVID. But in a year for flu, it's around 1,000 to 3,000 people. So basically over a month, we'll have killed more people from COVID than we would with the flu over an entire year. The good news, if there's any, is that the rollovers, if it's real, you can see the data start to flatten. If it's real and not a problem with saturation of healthcare system, then we might have finally peaked. But I also happen to know that there are new variants that are coming. Things are going up in UK, Italy, US. So it's very likely that things will start getting even worse now in Japan. And you can see we're already bad. We're already as bad as we were at the worst of the pandemic. So things are really not good, and don't seem to be dropping particularly either. So in case you're curious how this tracked with the strain, so if you look, the third and fourth dose vaccines contain the BA1 strain. You could see it over here. So this was the January 2022 strain, and this was in the fall 2022 vaccine. So somewhere around here is when we got the vaccines. Over fall 2022 would be here. So we got the vaccine with the correct strain around the correct time. In the fall of 2023, so incoming for the fourth dose, they're looking at an XBB 1.5 strain. These are all the XBBs, all the orange and reddish colors, they're all the XBB strains. So it will be a good match. So again, if you are able to, you should sign up to get the vaccine because your immunity does not last. So what you could see though is that there's interesting inflection points around the time. So now that measures have been lifted, you could see that basically the transmission probably has more to do with the strains now than with government policy or anything else. And so here you could see in orange the arrival of the XBB strains. It sounds like a Star Wars robot, right? So this is the arrival of the XBB strains in early May. And you could see over here the arrival of the super weird 20B variant. And then over here, we're getting an expansion of the BA275 and the XBB19. So basically, that's kind of the situation as we are now, and there will be more variants to come. The other thing you can see is that when the growth is higher, the rate at which we're cycling through strains is also higher. So the likelihood of discovering a very bad strain is also increasing. So I want the message to be very clear that COVID is not like the flu. So over here, I've taken the liberty of plotting the number of deaths every year from influenza. And at the top, what you can see is the number of COVID deaths in the last few years. So this is in 2020 when it came at the start of the year, but there were a lot of lockdowns. Then this is as things relax slowly. This was in 2022. Now at this point, this up with data up to April only, April of this year. And if you remember, April, we were kind of low, not where we are now. So with data up to April, the deaths are that many so far in the year. If you assume that they would be the same and you go times 12, divide 4, this is where we expect the deaths to be for this year. So this year really will have killed more people than all the years where we were careful. The death and doctor's visit from COVID are similar to influenza. So it's around 0.1 to 0.4% for influenza. It's around 0.1% right now for COVID. So it's death per number of doctors visit about that disease. And then the reinfection rate, though, is what's very different. With COVID, if you caught COVID today, you can expect that you would be possibly could be reinfected within 4, I mean, I'm saying 3 to 4, maybe it's more accurate to say 4 to 6 months would be your reinfection rate. So you're expected to catch COVID maybe 2 to 3 times per year. Whereas for influenza, you're expected to catch it once every 3 to 5 years at most. And so that's a big problem. And that's why, because we have the same death rate, but we have so many more cases, and because there's in particular no seasonality for COVID, there's no infection or vaccine that provides a short, the infection and vaccine provide only a short-lived immunity. Your half-life is around 3 months on both infection and vaccine. There's a higher transmission per case, so there's more opportunities for the immune escape and the mutation. And the cost to healthcare, of course, is going to be huge, and at least 12 times worse than it was with the flu. So with flu, people were taking many measures to try and reduce the cost to healthcare. And when I say cost, I don't just mean dollars. I mean the healthcare become so busy that if people go to the health center for some other problem, maybe they have a car accident or maybe they have cancer screening, it's difficult for them to access care because the healthcare system become overly busy. If you think about this, the healthcare workers have been working overtime and overly busy since winter 2020. And the busyness at emergency really only quieted down for a few months at a time. And now they're again at one of their highest point. So what is COVID into the future? So one thing that we should be doing is surveillance. And surveillance requires open data. And the reason why we want surveillance is we want to be able to know in advance what strains are on the horizon, and we want to have an accurate sense of how busy the healthcare system will become and whether measures should be taken. So as an example here, I'm showing you the Quebec case and deaths, but I've put on top the brown line. The brown line is the wastewater. So these are amount of COVID virus per, I think, liter of wastewater, but I've rescaled it so that we can compare it to the case counts. And what you could see is that it gives a pretty good, it's not an exact, and in fact, I've done a very bad job. I've done it very quickly, but it's a pretty reasonable way to see. For example, now there's an uptick in cases in Quebec, and you could see this is reflected also in the wastewater. So it gives you a fairly good, and you could see it says it a little ahead of time. So it gives you a fairly good predictor for raise, and it also allows you to not rely on people self-testing, because when people are tired of self-testing, then this becomes not so accurate. You don't have to rely on doctor's visit. And the problem with doctor's visit is that only serious cases are picked up, but in wastewater, you can pick up all virus. It can be expanded to monitor more than just COVID. We could look at flu, we could look at RSV, and we could continuously monitor for a growth in the infection and have an early warning system. And we could also look for new variants. So if there's a new strain that's taking over, we could see. This in the bottom left is an example of an actual wastewater project that Japan has. You could go to this website and they have some data. They've run pilot project for 1 year. I don't know if it's continuing. The data for the website is not updated all the time. It was just provided after that 1 year test concluded. So there's no continuous data that anyone can use to track this, but it would be very interesting if it was. And I want to maybe leave you with these parting words that in Japan, it's very common to tell people about their risk for everyday life. This is the amount of cedar. This is yearly, but basically you could find the amount of pollen in the air every day during pollen season. They give you the exact level and whether you should wear a mask or not. This is the ultraviolet index, if you should wear your little sleeves and your sunbrella. This is the clothing index. So this says adjust temperature with short sleeves with a cardigan. Here it says that in the evening of yesterday, oh, here we go. The evening of today, you should adjust your temperature with short sleeves and a cardigan. So you're really, it is also a beer index. I didn't know that was a thing. Turns out every day is a good day for beer. So I'm not sure the point of it is, but also whether you should wear your umbrella, whether your laundry will dry well. So it's kind of unbelievable to me that in a country where they give you so many good warning about how you should face your day, that they would also not have a COVID index or a flu index. So I hope in the future, such things can be considered. So I'll just wait a bit for the bell. I'll let you look at these fun index because I had a lot of fun putting them together yesterday. Okay, so the bell has ended. So basically, since COVID-19 burden, and by burden, I just don't mean just the death, but also the cost and the absenteeism is higher than flu, we cannot actually, even if we want to, even if we choose to, the reality will be that it's not going to be normal. So even if we act as though it's normal, the everyday life will not be normal. The busyness at hospital will not be normal. The rate at which we lose people will not be normal. The cost of the disease will not be normal. So high spread means that we rapidly evolve the virus and that new variants could slowly drive the virus to be either completely asymptomatic, which would be fantastic, and that would be our pathway back to actual normal. So that could happen, and that would be great. The other possibility is that the new variants could drive a very bad mutation at any time, which could spike up our deaths. It could be the return of neurological symptoms, because one thing I didn't mention is when the arrival of Omicron is really when we saw COVID symptoms shift from what was really partly a neurological disease. So, when you lose your sense of taste and smell, this was actually actual brain damage. Traditional SARS, which was back in 2003, was actually a neurological disease. It attacked your nerves and you had horrible pain, like your body was on fire. And so SARS as a virus can have many different manifestations. Right now, it looks more like a cold or a flu, but with any mutation, these neurological symptoms could return. And in particular, if our vaccines are against the strains that look like, or if our circulating strains we're gaining immunity against the strains that are like the flu, it's possible that it could mutate to escape that. And by escaping, it could become more harmless or become a neurological disease again. So the spread basically stops with you. So every single person's action contributes to the growth or decay of the cases. So when you see that cases are high or getting high, you should consider getting vaccinated to reboost your immunity and avoid becoming a transmitter, because the vaccine protect more long-term against severe infection, but transmission is not very good protection. It's very short-lived. You should wear a mask when the cases are high. You should use takeout instead of dine-in when the cases are high. You should avoid unnecessary gathering or travel. And especially if you're feeling any symptoms, even if you don't know if it's COVID, stay home because it could be COVID and it transmits very easily. And it would be good if you got tested, but you don't need to. It costs a lot of money. So at least just stay away from other people if you feel sick. And that's basically all I had for you today. And I'm happy to take questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting and provocative talk. So thank you very much. Yeah, well, one thing I might suggest that those things, some forecasts you are so fascinated about, that they came from the meteorological agency. So I think maybe we should task the meteorological agency for the forecast of the COVID and take it from the Ministry of Health.
That's right. I mean, I think so. What's interesting about that is that you know that it's become very important now to do the rain forecast, right? They have fairly accurate rain forecasting for the risk of flooding in different areas because the risk has become very high. This data actually is now all accessible, open source on a website for anyone to access and for people to contribute their own model to that database. And I think it'd be really good if we could have something like that where for COVID, there would be this site where everybody can take the data, all the data that's available, whether it's wastewater, whether it's doctor's visit. The doctor's visit data actually is confidential and it's behind locked door. It's all held by the Jamdas people and it's not public, but it should be made public. It is in other countries. And that would allow everyone to make little apps actually for prediction and for warning that, you know, the media could easily use. So I think, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah. So Miyoshi-san used to work for the meteorological agency, so maybe we should talk him to convince him.
Well, the issue is not released. The issue is, so it's not the publishing that's the part. The problem is that the data is not considered public data. So it's not pushing it out there. That's the problem, is that the people who hold the data think it is confidential data. And in particular, I was at a conference in Nara last week, and basically I met with Nishura-san. I think he's called Nanawariji-san. If you don't know this nickname, you know. And basically he was telling me that when he meets with the government, they say, we're very interested to hear about all the current circulating disease, but please, we don't want to hear about corona. And that's a big problem because, I mean, it's kind of a Donald Trump approach. If we pretend it doesn't exist, it can go away. But in reality, of course, there's reality. And wishing it wasn't so does not change the facts. So the government seems very determined to keep this data from being out. They think if people have information, they might change their behavior. And actually, they want to prevent that right now, is my sense. I could be wrong, but that's my sense of what's happening. And the other thing is, yeah, there's a lot of issues surrounding healthcare data where they feel that it is confidential. And the definition of confidential medical data in Japan, I think probably needs updating because they have a trouble deciding, because the procedure normally is to clear house data. You label data as being potentially confidential, then it is clear house, meaning it is determined, it is anonymized and depersonalized, basically, to be made into public data. And once it clears approval, it should go out the door. And in Japan, I hear that such data, oftentimes, they can clear it only for one purpose, and you have to keep requesting over and over again. Every time the use will be different. So such policy probably have to change to really properly manage the situation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any other question or comment or your thought?
Can I have a question? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so this view graph, on the late stage, you have a lot of variants, and then is it because, I mean, what's the reason? Or did we have many variants before, but it's not plotted, or?
Well, so I have a good, I'm happy for your question because I made this graph yesterday. And then today I looked at the same website, same graph, and look, they're all gone. So I have no idea what happened. You could see here the ton of lines that they saw, even which strains were there, and even that gray patch is not there anymore.
Oh.
And so, and in particular, if you look at this graph here, there's no long tail into the B2 strain. Whereas if you look at my presentation, I'll show you again. I didn't show you this part, but it's hidden here. This was yesterday. There was this long toggle for that strain that is identified that's really an old strain that should not have been circulating. So my own graph that I made yesterday from that exact URL looks like this. And then the graph today from the same website, same URL, looks like this. I cannot explain it. I don't visit Next Strain often enough to know if that's a thing that they screw up very often or not.
So where is this website?
Yeah, so it's difficult maybe for you to see. So this is May 2023.
Yeah.
This is July 2023. And this is September now. So you can see that right now, the dominant strain is an XBB. Well, I should say right now, and based on today's graph, the biggest clade is actually the XBB.1.9, but this variant that everybody was afraid of, the BA.275, is also present. But we can see that we had it grow, but it's now shrinking again.
Which website is this?
This is Next Strain. You can see, so if you scan this QR code, you can go to this website right now.
So who is organizing this website?
It's the Next Strain people, and the data, there's two sets of data. The data I'm showing you right now is the open data. There's a different set of data that, and this is for Japan only. There's a different set of data that is from JIS-AID. So these are two databases where people can deposit their strain. So PubMed has a place where people, has database where people can file. Every time they find a strain, they can file it. I can show you maybe from the website what you can see. I'm not sure how well it shows on your screen, but if you click, for example, on a strain, what it will tell you is it will tell you who are the authors of that sequencing. They were based in Shizuoka, and this strain was basically a BA.1.1.2, and it lists all the mutations compared to, I think, the BA.1 clade base strain. And so that type of information, you could also click here. This is the gene bank accession number. So if you click on that, you can get the full sequencing of the strain. So this data is then collated together. So this is all public data. It's then collated together to make, and in this group, Next Strain are constructing, see, it's data enabled by GenBank, and it's maintained by the Next Strain's team. And so you could track this. They have this for the whole world. This is for Japan specifically, but you can change, for example, the country here. I could change it to, let me just change it right now to, for example, Canada. And so now this is the graph for Canada. You can see that it looks a little bit different. And then, whoa, I guess Canada does not have a lot of data. That's very bad. Maybe United Kingdom. I think United Kingdom has some of the best ones, maybe. I can't remember. Yeah, it's much better than Canada. And you can see here, this is the EG.5.1, which is thought to be responsible for the latest growth in cases in various countries, in particular the UK. And you can see here, this is the XBB.1.9 that we have in Japan. So I think the EG.5.1 has not really made its way much in Japan yet. And that could be a problem, because if you look at the cases in the UK, let me make this a little bigger. And let me scroll down. Maybe I'll move this over. Okay, just wait. If I make this a little bigger, see, that's why it was easier for me to do this from my computer. I can show you the UK. Oops. There we go. And you could see now the cases are really going up right now in the UK since about July 3rd. And if we look back at the Next Strain graph, you could see that July is the arrival of that EG.5.1 strain, which is not yet in Japan. So if you look here, if we go back to Japan, we cannot see the XGG1 yet. And so we can expect that however high the cases are now, when the EGG strain hits Japan, this is going to become problematic. Because again, our cases are going to go up. And might I remind you, they will go up from where they are now, which is currently at its highest over the entire duration of the pandemic. So it's quite worrisome. That's it.
Okay, any other?
Number of death rate, is there any comparison between Japan and other countries? The same, around the same?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so for the entire pandemic and now too, the case so it becomes more difficult because the definition of case is changing now. Some people are relying on self-testing, some countries are relying on doctor's visit. I mean, some countries are relying on wastewater data. So case definition has become a bit more difficult. But certainly if you look at doctor's visit, deaths per doctor's visit, it's very consistent across countries. And in particular, basically, it's about the same as the influenza.
And so you used for the most recent data. So this case is kind of inferred from that this case ratio.
Yeah, so the deaths cases, so basically they're inferred. Yeah, that's right. They're inferred from the number of cases that are guessed to be existing. Based on the number of doctors' visits. So they can extrapolate how many people don't visit the doctor, and then you can extrapolate the same % death rate.
Yeah, so we don't have the discount from the death certificate.
Well, we do, thanks to you. So basically, you sent me, well, thanks to you. It's not thanks to you that we have the data, it's thanks to you that I have it. So I could probably, just a sec, I could probably get that for you. No, we're September 15. I think artwork. And I think, where's your thing? COVID deaths by month. So this is the document you sent me before, so I'll full screen it. And what you could see is kind of where we were at. So back in January, when the cases were approximately as high as they are now, 9,000 people died just in January. If you remember, in influenza, it's 3,000. In a bad year, it's 3,000 for the whole year. So back in January, when the cases were about the same, so these different columns are a bit difficult to interpret. And I'm not really sure, they don't line up perfectly with the number of COVID deaths that were reported in the past, because you see they have those for the past too. So I don't know if 1 or 1 and 2 should be sum, but 1 and 2, so this is the sum of 1 and 2. And then this is accidents that are thought to be related to COVID in the last row. So I think probably this number, 16,000, is probably the correct number to look at. But even if you look at 9,000, I mean, it's pretty bad. So you can see here, by June, we were at 700. In January, we were at 9,000 based on, these are actual death, not predictions. And if you look back at the presentation, so we had 9,000 in January. So here I'm predicting in January around 3,000. Oh, but it's summed over the whole month, right? And then over here, we were at around 600 for the whole month. So I was about 10 per day. And so you could see that most likely the deaths are the same now that they were in January. And so we would expect once again to see perhaps around 9,000 dead in these last few months per month for the foreseeable future.
I see. And this is quite remarkable because people's perception and the numbers is quite so far apart. So perhaps like people don't see the dying, they know like kind of eminent people or something like that. So I think at the start of the beginning of the COVID-19 infections, a very famous comedian died from the COVID-19. So that affects significantly the Japanese people's perceptions, but we don't see those kind of cases. So who are dying actually? Do you have any idea?
It's hard to say, but certainly old people are more likely to die than young people. So I can maybe show you this graph. Here we go. So basically, since Omicron's arrival, your likelihood of dying of COVID, so this is, it stayed mostly constant since that time. And your likelihood of dying of COVID, if you're in your 50s, is still 1 in 600. So when the cases get very high, your chances of dying is fairly high. Now, most of the people in this room are probably in this category around their 30s or 20s. Already between 20s and 30s, it makes a big difference. So in your 20s, you're at 1 chance in 29,000. And in your 30s, you're one chance in 5,000 or thereabout. So it might not seem like a very high likelihood of that, but I think if there was an amusement park ride and it killed 1 in 5,000 people who ride it, you probably wouldn't ride it. So what's not clear is whether your risk, if you caught COVID many times already and didn't die, what are your chances that the next time you catch it, you die? That I don't have a good sense of.
Yeah, so
The problem is, even if it's not you that's going to die, if you catch COVID and you give it to someone else, you might actually be responsible for their death. So there's that aspect too.
yeah, good point. Any other questions? Questions from the Zoom audience? If you have questions or comments, please unmute yourself.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Thank you for the very informative talk. And I have a question about the reinfection rate. So you showed the reinfection rate of the COVID is much higher than that of flu. And according to that data, you showed the immune, a short-lived immunity to the reinfection.
Yeah.
And my question is about the data for the reinfection rate, and is it normalized by the average contact frequency or average infection rate?
I think it's anecdotal, meaning it's not corrected for anything. Meaning if you question people how often so basically, I mean, it's not based on people's question, but basically on positive tests back when we still had intensive testing. So basically, how many people test positive more than once, twice, or something like that. So that's in part what it's based on. The other, and that's why it's like a rough number. The other thing it's based on, it's the half-life of the vaccine efficacy. So early on, maybe I still have this graph somewhere here in the background. Here we go. So from very early data, when the vaccines were first introduced, it was possible to look at how many times less likely someone was to catch COVID if they got the vaccine as opposed to did not. And basically, I mean, enough to say that this black line, this slope gives you the decay rate of the immunity, and it's about, the half-life is around 98 days, so about 3.2 months.
I see. So, okay. Yeah, so I asked that question because I recently got COVID, as I said to you personally, and I'm interested in how long, I guess, I will be safer than usual because of the immune system.
About 3 months.
About 3 months. Okay.
Yes and no. So that's could be partly a lie, because if you caught an old strain and a new strain come to Japan, if it's sufficiently different, your protection could be very minimal. So it might be less. I suspect that's not the case. I suspect that you should be safe from transmitting the virus. So safe from catching and transmitting for maybe about 3 months-ish. And I say that, but I also want to be mindful of one thing, is that another pattern that is not like the flu with COVID is that people get stuck with it. You catch it, you get better, but then you don't really get better. You still have that cough, you still have that sore throat, you still feel sick. And a lot of time people will retest positive later. So even after you got better, you sometimes haven't gotten fully better and you can transmit again. So it's become somewhat difficult, especially when strains are changing quickly. It's become difficult to tell if people are reinfected or it's the same infection that developed. Usually you can check by strain, what strain was it the first time or the second time, but sometimes they don't check for that. So it's not clear what fraction of reinfection event might actually be continuous chronic infection that has breakthroughs. I mean, certainly it's not all one or all the other. It's a mix.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to ask about the vaccination.
Yeah.
Do we expect new kind of vaccines will appear? Well, some people are suspicious about the present vaccine, you know.
So that is a good question. So basically, in terms of what's inside the vaccine, it's going to become like the flu, meaning they're going to keep recombining the vaccine every year, putting new viruses in, sometimes putting more than one strain in the same vaccine. So that's going to continue. So for example, if you got your vaccine last fall, you probably got the original strain plus the BA1. If you got a little further, it was BA4-5. And in this fall, if you're signing up or you've received recently the vaccine, you probably will receive or have received the XBB.1.5. They are preparing an EG51. You can see it right here. This is the EG51 strain in red and pink. So that strain, this is yesterday's graph, which is no longer accurate. But anyway, that strain is coming to the vaccines because it's causing a lot of problems worldwide. So in the future, your vaccine will have XBB.1.5. Now, that's if your question was talking about what's inside the vaccine. If you're talking about mRNA vaccine versus adenovirus vehicle vaccine, so the mRNA technology is probably here to stay. And if anything, it's now probably going to be expanded to other therapies than just vaccines. So that part, yes.
Yeah. Then how about the medicines? You know, if you have very effective medicines, then nobody have to worry about it, right?
Not necessarily. So the problem with most antivirals on acute infection, so the most success we've had with drugs, so antiviral drugs, have been on a chronic disease like HIV or hepatitis C, where you have a chronic infection. When the infection is very rapid, meaning you get it very quickly and you get very sick very quickly, those diseases, the antiviral drugs usually are not great. And so it's the same problem for flu, you know, Tamiflu, oseltamivir, and then for COVID, they have their antivirals. They can help to prevent severe outcome, but they have to be given early enough. Oftentimes, by the time the person is severe enough to show up at the hospital, it can be too late for the antiviral to be effective to prevent bad outcome. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else?
One question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but maybe if you move closer is better.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the very interesting talk. So I think we can also see it here in the plot, and I think close to the end of 2021, there was this worldwide very exceptional case where the death rate and the infection rate was super low in Japan, right? And at that time, people have maybe have thought that somehow maybe the virus has evolved itself out in such a way that it was no longer that effective. Has this been now understood? What happened? Or can we learn something from that point?
No. Well, okay. I don't think so. So the thing is that the reason why a virus becomes not so deadly is that it's already killed all the people that were going to die. So if you have a very wide spread, it's basically like a forest fire. Once it's gone through, you can't have a second fire because you've burned all the brittle wood. So that's possibly partly what could have happened at that point. You mix the fact that the virus spread widely with the fact that people who were going to die already died. So you've in a sense, a lot of frail people unfortunately passed away before, and then the people who were susceptible then passed away in that wave. And so that could be one reason why you bring the mortality down. But with the virus evolving as it is, that could change, and it does change. So I don't think I think what you were asking is whether it was a property of the virus at that time. And I don't think that's the case. It also corresponds to approximately the time when I think we were massively deploying vaccines. And if the vaccines are all put out at around the same time, it really provides an amazing neutralization of transmission for the whole countrywide when we synchronize it. So it makes a big choke point. So that's possibly, if I had to guess, that would be my guess. So I think you're saying about this gap, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this gap is the vaccine effect, not the strain effect. So I could probably show you, I think I have one where for the UK, so in most countries, so when the vaccine was introduced in the UK, it went from 2% to 0.2%. So this is, this is approximately when vaccines showed up. And then it actually maintained thereafter. And it's different than, for example, what you see in Japan. Let me show you the Japan. Well, this is the Canada data. It's basically, you can see the same, where you can see a departure when the vaccines show up, and you could see a departure when the boosters show up, but basically in between, the curve catch back up. So that's that waning immunity problem. So yeah, it's not a strain property. It was actually a property of the vaccines. It's a testament to how many deaths the vaccine were able to prevent.
So what is actually your opinion on restricting the booster shots to, like, I think only age group above 60 or something? For example, in my case, the last vaccine was almost 2 years ago now. So what is your opinion on this?
Well, my opinion is the stupidest thing you could do. So in Canada, they specifically decided to make the influenza vaccine. This is back in the days. They decided to make the influenza vaccine free to everyone. No questions asked. Walk into a pharmacy and you can get the shot. And the reason was that you could decrease the cases significantly. Now, that's less true for flu, and we could have that conversation. But for COVID, it would certainly be true that if we just made vaccine widely available, super convenient to get, and completely free, there are lots of people who would choose to not be vaccinated, and that's fine. But that's what I said. With every person who makes the right decision, we can decrease the transmission. So I personally would be revaccinated every maybe 4 to 6 months. I would get a new vaccine, even if it's the same strain, because the immunity wanes. And that would protect me, and it would protect the people around me at a higher level. And so, and especially if it's not synchronized, that everybody's kind of getting it at different times, then you can imagine that you have this ongoing good amount of immunity, and people can act as like fire breaks, just like a fire. You can stop the spread if enough people are breaking the transmission chains. So yeah, I would like it to be free, massively available, and extremely convenient to get, because there's already lots of people who don't want to get vaccine. That's fine. But for those of us who would like, it would be great. And by the way, I have signed up, so they will not send you your vaccine. I'm in Shibuya-ku. They will not send me the vaccine coupon, but there is a website I could go to request my coupon. And I've requested it for me, and then Kip also wants his, so I made it for him. So I think, in your words, probably there is still free vaccination available this fall for everyone, no matter your age or health condition, but you do have to make a request for it. And I think, again, that's stupid. If they send the vaccine coupon to everyone, it would encourage people to consider it, especially given how high cases are right now and how overstretched hospitals are right now. It's really necessary. It would really help relieve the pressure on the healthcare system so that it's available for you and me when we actually get sick.
Yeah, it really depends on the world and the cities. And for Mitaka City, I think we expect to receive the coupons for everybody. So
yeah, it's not coming. I mean, in Shibuya, they were not planning on spending. They were only going to send if you sign up. That's my understanding.
Okay.
We got a coupon without signing up.
Oh, what word is it? Yeah, so it depends on the word, of course. I don't know about different people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway,
So 100 years ago, there was a what is called a Spanish flu or something, and that was that a similar thing, a COVID type, or completely different?
Wait, do you mean Spanish flu or do you mean swine flu?
Spanish flu, I think. He mentioned about 100 years ago or something. So
you mean 1918 flu? Yeah. What about it?
Is it similar to the COVID, or it's just the influenza or something, or what was it?
I mean, it was the flu, so it was a different virus. I don't know what. So here's what I can say. So the 1918 flu was a virus, an influenza virus, not a COVID virus. I think it was an H1N1 strain, if that means anything to you. And it's believed to have been so devastating in a combination of factors. It's the virus itself has certain properties, but the other aspect of this was that was right at the end of the war, the 1418 war. And a lot of people were malnourished, living in very unclean condition. And a lot of the deaths were attributed to co-infection between bacterial and influenza infection. So it was a co-infection of bacteria plus virus inside people's lung that would have been particularly deadly. And I have a colleague, actually, that's her whole research field, is the interaction of having a bacterial infection first, then influenza, or influenza first, then bacterial infection. Because in one order, it's much more mild, and in the other order, it's very deadly. So she's trying to understand the mechanism that trigger that.
Yeah. In Japan, there was a big wave, I think, I mean, 3, 4, I don't remember. And then it eventually died out after three years or something, 4 years. And
yeah,
so that's a difference from normal flu and then the COVID.
Yeah.
COVID stay constant somehow.
Yeah, the transmission rate wasn't that high. Like as far as I know, the 1918 flu, the transmission was not atypical. It was typical of a normal influenza virus, which means it's maybe 10 times less transmissible than COVID, for example, right? So each person infected fewer people. And then the other thing is that it was very severe. And so people died, I think, quite quickly after infection, which meant that they have much less chance to walk around and infect other people. So that's the other kind of good news that allows the virus to really not last. I mean, it's the same thing with Ebola, right? It's extremely deadly. And so they're very devastating disease, but they self-resolve very quickly. And then the other thing with the 1918 flu is that even today, these people still have, all the people who are alive today that were alive then, which is not so many people now, have fantastic antibodies that have come in handy for some of the more modern influenza infections. So some of the property of the 1919 virus is seen again in more modern strains occasionally. And these people are unexpectedly protected for flu. So they're quite elderly people, and you would think that they'd be very susceptible in a bad flu year. But for some reason, in these cases, oftentimes, they're actually quite well protected in surprising ways because of the similarity between the 1918 strain and some of the very severe strains of flu that can happen from time to time. But the bad flu events, I should mention, are not usually caused by mutation. They're actually caused, we think, by zoonotic introduction. So basically, a bird gets the flu, it either gives it directly to a person, or more importantly, and all our pandemics kind of come from there, the bird gives it to a pig, the pig is co-infected with a human virus, he acts as a mixing vessel, and then people catch it from the pig, and then it both has the severity markers of bird flu, and it has the transmissibility of human flu. And so that's basically where, for example, the 2009 swine flu pandemic is thought to have originated. And that's why there are people like my guest who came several months ago to give a talk about flu. That's what the CDC does all day, every day. They're collecting samples from nature in different animal population and checking them for their likelihood of emerging as threats, epidemic threats.
One realistic question.
Yeah.
Can you show the last slide?
Last slide, you mean this one?
Yes. There will be a big meeting of physical society from this weekend. And there will be many people, and at the same time, there is a beer festival at the same place. So if you not have any, why you attend that kind of big meeting?
Yeah, well, they didn't invite me. I'd be happy to go to that meeting. You can recommend, if you know someone on the committee, you can recommend they should appoint me to the committee. I think ultimately, I mean, one thing is I wear a mask all the time, and it makes people nervous around me because they feel like, are they being bad? Should they wear a mask? Am I expecting them to wear? And I don't. The point is, I think everybody can make their own choice. But I think when the cases are high, we have to look out for each other more and think about what we can do each individually to try and stop this problem from becoming worse in terms of the hospitals. So that's kind of my general thinking.
Okay, thank you very much for a very informative talk, and we should be at least informed and make good decisions, and that's an important point, I guess. And thank you very much for helping us to do that. And thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Can you share this slide somewhere? Or?
Yes, I can.